Real quick, guys, want to give you a heads up that our sponsor, Babbel, which is an awesome language learning app, is giving you 25% off when you use the link under this video. I used Babbel for just a few weeks before I left for my recent trip to Italy. I knew very little Italian before that, and I was actually pretty surprised how easily I could hold a conversation in Italian. Because of what I learned using Babbel, the lessons were easy to fit into my schedule, just 15 minutes a day. The progress I've made is motivating me to stick with it. I think Babbel really is the best app to learn a language. Go check it out. You'll get 25% off using the link under this video. Okay, I'm just now caught up on the different Sunday show interviews that happened this past Sunday. One was an interview with Bernie Sanders on CBS's Face the Nation. Bernie Sanders is running for president in 2020. He's currently a senator. And there was a moment where the interviewer, Margaret Brennan, truly embarrassed herself in trying to sort of play the tough devil's advocate or giving Bernie Sanders a gotcha question. And it completely imploded in utter, total embarrassment when the topic of Iran came up. Now, before I play that part, I'm just going to play the first 20 seconds of this interview, which will immediately give you a sense of just how dumb and cringy this interview was. Listen to the strange sort of, I don't even know what to call it, just the entire demeanor of interviewer Margaret Brennan is bizarre towards Bernie. Here's a setup of how this interview started.
Thank you very much for making time.
My pleasure.
You've been called an existential threat to the Democratic Party. How much resistance within the party do you face?
Well, first of all, I got to figure out what this existential threat actually means. But what it came from is Third Way, which is the corporate wing of the Democratic Party.
So Bernie does a good job of slowing it all down at every opportunity during the interview, reducing the hysteria. But then they get to the topic of Iran, and Bernie starts correctly criticizing Donald Trump's completely erratic action on Iran over the weekend, which we covered, where we were bombing Iran, and then we called off the bombing of Iran. And Margaret Brennan starts playing, I don't know if it's, again, just playing a weird devil's advocate or playing a semantic game when Bernie starts talking about war with Iran, where she says, well, war, I mean, you know, it was a limited strike, and Bernie Sanders takes none of it, and he accurately and precisely and concisely and pithily destroys that argument.
I want to ask you about Iran.
Good.
Was President Trump's decision this week to call off that strike the right one?
See, it's like somebody setting a fire to a basket full of paper and then putting it out. He helped create the crisis, and then he stopped the attacks. The idea that we're looking at a president of the United States who, number one, thinks that a war with Iran is something that might be good for this country.
He was just doing a limited strike.
Oh, just a limited strike. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I just didn't know that it's okay to simply attack another country with bombs, just a limited strike. That's an act of warfare.
This is a great example of the different standards that are applied to the actions of the United States versus the actions of other countries by Americans, okay? And this is one of the things where it's so refreshing. You know, I have family in Argentina. I was born there. I have family in France and different places. And when I talk to them, it's refreshing to talk to people who are not applying a different standard to the United States than to other countries. Because think about it. If any other country launched a so-called limited strike of any kind against the United States on an American military base abroad even, everyone would be on the same page in the U.S. It's an act of warfare. Pearl Harbor, in a sense, it was a limited strike on a U.S. military base. The double standard has to stop. And I guess I sort of get the idea that Margaret Brennan is trying to play devil's advocate here and be the tough interviewer who's going to hold Bernie Sanders to account. But she's choosing all the wrong spots. It's very ignorant the way she's trying to do it. If North Korea did a limited strike in South Korea, would that be a limited strike or would it be an act of warfare? I think we all know the answer. In some sense, 9/11 was a limited strike on a very specific section of New York City and Washington, D.C. There was total consensus that it was an act of war, which was then used to justify not one but two wars, the war in Iraq, which was completely unrelated to 9/11, and an escalation of the war in Afghanistan. So I'm fine debating any of these foreign policy decisions on the merits, whether it's Iran, Syria, Venezuela, China, Cuba policy, Russia. I mean, there are serious conversations to be had about any of those countries. And I'm not just saying militarily, but in many different ways There are legitimate debates about what U.S. foreign policy should be and how it has worked or not worked in the past. But there is this very dangerous and disturbing tendency for Americans in a sort of bubble to shrug off the actions of the American military when, if we reverse the situation, these would be obvious acts of war, which the same people would say, oh, wow, that was an act of war. The U.S. must now retaliate against this act of war. So I don't believe that it's a useful type of devil's advocacy by the interviewer, Margaret Brennan. I'm curious to hear what you think about it. I understand playing devil's advocate. I do it on this show, but I try to do it in a thoughtful way where it makes sense. I don't just pick random semantic devil's advocacy and throw it out there to make it seem like I'm challenging the guest. I want to be challenging the guest in a way that is substantive and critically useful. It's merely sort of manufacturing a context in which we can then shrug off our own aggressive acts of violence, what Margaret Brennan is doing here. It should be denounced, and this is not the type of cover we want to provide to our foreign policy apparatus, particularly not when you have a completely clueless and ignorant president in Donald Trump surrounded by people who are almost completely off the rails, unhinged when it comes to foreign policy. People like John Bolton and Stephen Miller and others that are surrounding Donald Trump. It's straight up irresponsible to do this bogus gotcha faux devil's advocacy that was done here. Good for Bernie, though, in absolutely destroying it. Make sure you follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. I've got some great behind the scenes stuff from the studio, people curious about what things look like here, and lots of other great stuff. Follow me there at david.pakman and follow the show on Instagram at David Pakman Show.